And then obviously, I'm going to shamelessly promote Aaron Rupar as we're going live. And we were just talking about how Substack Live just jumps right in and goes live as you're talking. Aaron Rupar is here. You know him, you love him. He is the editor of Public Notice, and also he has all the clips that you don't want to see, but you must see on social media. And I've had Aaron join us because a lot's been happening, folks, in the past, well, 5 months since Donald Trump has resumed control and power. And specifically, we know that right-wing media has emerged as a dominant force. And specifically, right-wing media, Aaron, I think anyone who thought you and me were being hyperbolic that MAGA and Republican voters live on Earth 3, I think specifically the past week in particular has shown them that about 30% of our fellow Americans live in the upside down, right? Specifically with Vance Bolter, the man who was a political assassin, killed an elected official in Minnesota. You would think back in the day, Aaron, you and I are old enough that regardless of your politics, back in the day, Republicans would call up Democrats, right? There'd be some sort of, well, this is terrible and this is bad. But it's so bad right now with right-wing media that Mike Lee, the senator, Republican senator out of Mormon, has put up, still has a tweet, I think, posted up on Twitter, mocking and ridiculing Tim Walz, right? And they don't feel the need to apologize because their base is radicalized. They feed them lies. And Vance Bolter is a Trump voting Republican supporter, Christian nationalist. It's literally documented. And they're still calling him a Marxist and a leftist, right? And then with the immigration rate, even though Donald Trump is underwater, if you're to watch right-wing media, you think that there's an invasion and LA is a hellscape on fire, like Escape from LA. And then the other fascinating rift that we have to talk about is Tucker Carlson versus Ted Cruz. So let's start with that one. Tucker versus Ted, and what that shows, the fissures that are happening within the right wing and how right-wing media is covering it. Because I think this is something where it's like you want both sides to lose, and I hate praising Tucker because he's a piece of shit. But he did something that I thought corporate media should have done, Democratic establishment should have done, in asking these questions of Ted Cruz, revealing the intellectual and moral bankruptcy of the right wing. And now the right wing is turning on Tucker. So I give it to you. Talk to us about Tucker versus Ted Cruz.
Yeah, I think you're right to highlight that this is really an interesting rift in the party right now. And, certainly in my line of work, being more immersed like in Fox and Newsmax, they're still kind of full neocon on this where, they're going along with kind of the Trump program of, if Trump wants to bomb Iran, they'll be on board for that. And so Tucker has become kind of a voice in the wilderness in being, sort of anti-interventionist, which I think a lot of people falsely thought that Trump was during the campaign, because of course one of his big items in his platform was ending the forever wars, not getting the U.S. entangled in foreign conflicts. And we can see how hollow that was based on what's happened this week. But basically, long and short of it, I mean, I'm sure people probably have at least seen the clips of Ted Cruz going on Tucker's podcast and Tucker kind of asking him very basic questions about Iran that ended up being gotchas because Ted was not really prepared to answer them. I mean, I think one was even just, what is the population of Iran, which I believe is, something in the neighborhood of 90 million. But Ted Cruz basically said, I don't know. And then, Tucker came back with, wait, you want to bomb this country and you can't even answer, very basic questions about the population there. And, it just kind of revealed, I think, some of the recklessness, kind of the lack of thought and the carelessness of Republicans like Ted Cruz, who are basically just going along with Trump at this point. Ted Cruz, I think, has been throughout his career, not an opponent of foreign interventions like that, to say the least. And, in this case, it seems like he hadn't really done his homework. But, again, yeah, you're right to highlight that, Tucker was getting a lot of praise, at least on X, where he is quite popular for his stance here. And it was the rare, interview where you see with someone like Ted Cruz where he is really being challenged, because a lot of times you see Ted Cruz on Hannity's show, which is kind of the quintessential Huffy interview place for Republicans like him. And even in the Senate, I mean, there aren't a lot of opportunities for the type of back and forth that we saw there. And so it did make for good television, or at least, watching on the internet. But like you, I mean, I posted the meme of the guy holding a sign at a sports game that says, I just want both teams to lose. And, that's kind of my broader attitude, because I don't think with Tucker Carlson, he's really coming at this from a place of good faith.
He's a terrible
So
person.
I can't really, yeah. Yeah. So I don't want to hand it to him. I'm not going to hand it to him, but I will say in that particular context, I think, he came out looking a lot better than Ted Cruz.
The reason why I'll hand it to him in this particular case is when it comes to these basic questions about the right-wing kind of neocon, war hawkish support for Israel, no one asks them basic facts. And what Tucker did, regardless of his intention, because I don't know his intention, and he's a terrible person, folks, is all he did was a couple of things. Asked for basic facts and did follow-ups. That's it. And Ted Cruz, master debater, Harvard, right? Could not answer basic facts, right? And there was another clip which I thought was even more damning. He says, as a Christian, it says in the Bible, I have to support Israel. And then Tucker says, where in the Bible? Ted Cruz couldn't tell him. And they said, when you mean the nation of Israel, modern state nation of Israel, pre-47, the entire, river to the sea, couldn't answer, right? And then he asked him questions about AIPAC, right? Do you take money from AIPAC? How much money do you take from AIPAC? Why do you take money from AIPAC? This is where I thought, Aaron, and I hate giving him, I agree with you. He's a terrible person. I hate giving him credit. These are basic journalistic questions that you would think that both the Democratic establishment would ask the right wing, and even corporate media would ask, why did it take Tucker to ask this? And I don't know if you agree with it, but I was just like, it reveals the America First mindset. And again, maybe he's paid by Russia, but Tucker's been on this for a while, the America First for a while. There's also Marjorie Taylor Greene, terrible. Thomas Massie, right?
Yep.
I think with Massie, he might be actually Massie actually might be more a true believer, right? With Tucker, we don't know. With Hawley, I think he shifts with the wind. But this question of basic questions about AIPAC, support for Israel, you saw Ted Cruz get completely floored, right? And my take on this, and you follow media, is how come this has not been asked by others?
Yeah, and I think you're right to point out that I think Dems have been a little limp on this. It's kind of a tough spot for some of them because they want to be seen as supportive of Israel, or at least kind of, paying lip service to the alliance there, and they don't want to, at this point in where they're in a hot war with Iran, kind of, sell them up the river, say we don't have their back. But I mean, you would hope that Dems would be kind of flanking out on cable news and making similar points or doing speeches, but it seems like it's been pretty quiet on that front. So, yeah, I mean, I think you're right to point out that there's a hunger for someone to be speaking these truths. And unfortunately, Tucker Carlson is the person, I guess, doing that in this specific context. And so, when I saw these clips circulating a couple nights ago, I was not around a computer, but I saw, kind of my competitor / friend Asen, he was reposting the original clips that were on the Tucker Carlson Presents Twitter page, but some of the clips he was reposting with his own captions had 4 or 5 million views, which is a lot of views, even with the inflated numbers that Twitter uses. And so, the interview, I think, number one, got a lot of attention, for some of the things that Tucker was saying and how kind of outside of the political mainstream they are these days. Because again, you watch Fox and they got the war boner going on Fox. They got basically on a rotation. It's like Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton, rotating between Fox News and Fox Business, making the case
with prayers coming in from Mike Huckabee.
Right. Absolutely. And so you're not really getting that viewpoint. I did actually see MSNBC yesterday doing a little bit of coverage of the Tucker interview. So at least it kind of made their airwaves in that specific context. But, this is one of those weeks and, where Trump, he loves to be the center of attention. Even as we're recording this, I mean, starting in 10 minutes, he has a situation room briefing with his national security team, which is kind of a joke because, earlier this week when he was asked about Tulsi Gabbard testifying that Iran is not seeking a nuclear weapon, he literally said, "I don't care what she said." So this idea that he's really, this idea that he's really taking advice from these people. I mean, he's going to make the decision on his own. So it's kind of a farce in that respect. But, Trump, it's one of those weeks where he's kind of sucked up all of the oxygen and all of the attention. And that I think there is an opening for Dems to kind of go out there and make the case against this, reckless war against Iran that we seem to be on the cusp of. But it seems like it's kind of tough for them because a lot of Democrats and the more mainstream in the party don't want to be seen as kind of betraying Israel. And I mean, there's probably a bunch of reasons for that. But when I've seen Dems doing interviews where this comes up, it's kind of like, they'll talk about how Congress has the war powers and Congress should be involved in this decision making, but they won't necessarily go all the way of like opposing the idea of striking Iran. And so, I guess I will, in that very
I mean,
limited sense, give Tucker some credit.
my take on that, and before we talk about this fissure that's happening that I want to exploit within the right wing, is that it's shameful, right? The polls just came out in the last 2 days that shows an overwhelming majority of Americans do not want war, right? I have the gray hairs. I remember the war on terror. I marched in the streets. I was a 21-year-old student. It's the world's worst. I told you so. I said the war on terror would be a disaster. The war on terror led to creation of ICE, led to the creation of the Patriot Act, led to the normalization of Islamophobia. Donald Trump, remember that? Said Barack Obama, I'll take him at his word. Maybe he's not Muslim, right? The birther conspiracy. And now you have the same hawks, the chicken hawks, people like Lindsey Graham and others come out, right? Rah, rah, rah for war. They won't go to war, but they'll send young men to die for war and they'll support Israel and they get paid by AIPAC. It's both ideological and also because they're afraid about the political backlash, right? And Ted Cruz apparently really believes in that Christianity, so much so that he's perfectly fine to throw his own wife and dad under the bus to get mocked by Donald Trump. And when asked, well, where in the Bible is it? Great clip if you haven't seen the Tucker Carlson, Ted Cruz. Can't even mention it in the Bible, right? But I do think that you got Thomas Massie's coming out, and AOC joined him, same with Ro Khanna, right? And you got Marjorie Taylor Greene. I hate these people, right? Where's Chuck Schumer? Where's Hakeem Jeffries? For the love of God, man, you are the Democratic establishment. You see the base. You see not just your base, but you see the majority of American people. Even when it comes to MAGA, there is an America First movement. And the America First movement says no intervention. We want that money to be spent here in America. And you see Tucker, Candace Owens, terrible people, folks, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others kind of, part of that flank. So this, to me, Aaron, is a failure of leadership when it comes to the Democratic establishment, because why the hell is Tucker Carlson, Thomas Massey, and Marjorie Taylor Greene being more loud against what will be a disastrous war, an utterly disastrous war that will put U.S. troops under risk? There will be blowback. That even Saudi Arabia, folks, is coming out on side of Iran. Saudi Arabia is saying, yeah, don't do this, Israel, right? So I think it has to be named that the establishment, at least, is failing, and we live in the upside down, and I can't believe the Democratic establishment is making me say that Tucker Carlson is actually going to perhaps keep us from war, right? Like the America First part of the Republican Party might actually save us from war than the Democratic establishment. Do you agree or disagree with me?
I agree with you. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily look at Schumer as being someone I would expect to be speaking out on this particular issue because he's been a big pro-Israel guy. And so, that kind of is what it is to me. But I think you're right. I mean, again, it's something I've noticed too, where, there just aren't very many Dems kind of speaking out forcefully on this. And, I will say, I mean, we're kind of like speed running the George W. Bush, I guess both terms really, because, I mean, as you were talking about back, post 9/11, I mean, there was like a whole winter and spring of debate about the Iraq war authorization of force. And like, that was a big protracted debate. And like this whole Iran thing kind of happened in like a week, which is it's like bewildering how quickly this is unfolding.
7 days.
So, so, it's hard to kind of wrap your mind around it. I mean, my sense, and I don't want to get too kind of like pundit brain, but, I think Trump basically wants the credit for a huge military victory without the risk, really. So, I'm still kind of skeptical of the idea that he's going to directly involve U.S. forces in any sort of confrontation with Iran at this point. We'll see about that. But, it's interesting to reflect on, and maybe you remember this too, like right after Trump was inaugurated in 2017, there was about a 3-week period there where I thought we were going to war with Iran then, because that was Michael Flynn's big thing when he was national security advisor. He gave one press briefing back then, which I remember very vividly, where, he was really banging the drums for war with Iran. And then shortly after that, the scandal of him being in touch with the Russian ambassador during the transition period, like that became a big news story. And then, he was kind of after that, that basically led to his ouster just a few weeks later. And so, that kind of put the brakes on that. But the reason I bring that up is because it does seem like this has been kind of percolating in Trump world, going back to his first term, this idea of striking Iran. And I don't know if the calculations now, with Assad falling in Syria, that Iran is more isolated now, and maybe there's kind of a thought that they can keep this more contained with the Iranian leadership being in kind of a weak position right now. But it's also worth noting just how incoherent some of what Trump's messaging is on this. I mean, yesterday he was asked about the possibility of Iranian leadership coming to the White House for a visit, which and he said, "I'm open to that, but they're going to have a hard time getting here because they can't leave the country." And it's like, he still seems to want to negotiate even while he's threatening hostilities. I mean, even went as far yesterday as to allude to possible nuclear strikes against Iran, saying, I've given them the ultimate ultimatum. Leaving that to be, inferred in terms of what exactly he meant, but that's how I took it at least. So I don't know. We're all over the board with this.
Which
But
is
again,
terrifying, right, Aaron?
yeah,
Because
it's terrifying, right? I know.
it's one of those situations why you need competent leadership, and right now we're being led by the world's cruelest and dumbest people. Is that Donald Trump is playing footsie and flirting with potential World War III. I might do it, I might not do it. We'll see. And then that's almost an exact verbatim quote, folks, when it comes to joining Israel and striking Iran. Also, furthermore, Tehran, you must evacuate now. It's a city of 17 million people, right? And
Yep.
then he's asking for the unconditional surrender of Iran. Why would a foreign country have unconditionally surrender to another country without war? And then, folks, for those who don't follow Middle Eastern politics or know much about Islam, he has openly, just 2 days ago, openly flirting with and telling the world we can assassinate the Ayatollah anytime we want, but we haven't done it. Folks, in addition to being the supreme leader of Iran, for those who don't know, there's 1.7 billion Muslims in the world. The majority are Sunni, like me, at about 85%. 15% are Shia. So for many Shia Muslims, the Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran, in addition to being the political leader of Iran, is also a spiritual leader. So if you are threatening assassination of the spiritual leader of millions of Muslims, what is that going to do? It's going to have radicalization and blowback, right? And as this is happening, I'm so glad you mentioned the flip-flopping. Donald Trump ran on an America First promise. America is going to be respected. If you recall, Aaron, Ukraine-Russia war will end. Hasn't, right? Trade wars, there's going to be deals, zero deals. Prices of eggs are going to go down. They've gone up, right? And furthermore, that there's going to be peace in Gaza. Gaza is just a wasteland now, complete devastation. We're not talking about Gaza. I think that's why Netanyahu wants to shift, if you will, the attention from the genocide in Gaza to Iran. And right now, oh, okay, we might flirt with Iran. And when he talks about America first, he said, well, America first is whatever I say it is. And the reason why I bring that up is now you're seeing the split now with right-wing media, and you follow right-wing media, where, fascinating to see, Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene took a shit on Fox. And Tucker, who helped create Fox, said, oh, yeah, it's just propaganda to the seniors. And then Marjorie echoed that point. I'm all for exploiting the fissures, Aaron, right? I'm here, I love this. For those who follow the left hook, one of my favorite memes is Ken Watanabe from Godzilla. Let them fight. Talk to us about how Fox and right-wing media is dealing with the whiplash that we're witnessing, where the Donald Trump that they champion as being America first is now openly pro-war, and they're trying to, if you will, do a fast one on their viewers. And then you have Tucker and Marjorie Taylor Greene throwing Fox News under the bus.
Yeah, if you watch a lot of Fox, you wouldn't even really have the sense that there is a fissure. It's basically Trump cult TV. So, they basically take Trump statements at face value in the sense of, even though the intelligence community has said that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon, they'll cite Trump statements to the contrary, that maybe there's some sort of secret information that Trump has, or they'll cite the fact that Trump has been talking about how Iran can't have a nuclear weapon for the past 20 years, as though that justifies, striking them. So, I haven't personally, and I can't say I've watched every second of Fox, but if they have at all covered the Tucker Ted Cruz fiasco, or the interview, I haven't seen it on Fox. And if you watch Hannity, your typical lineup for an hour of Hannity is going to be like Lindsey Graham, Tom Cotton, administration official X. They're not really bringing in dissenting views. That's true for Fox and Friends as well. So you really only get the MAGA line on Fox. Now, if you watch, Marjorie Taylor Greene will go on, her boyfriend, I think, is a correspondent for Real America's Voice or something like that. If you go further out there, kind of, and that's Bannon aligned, kind of fringe streaming platform. Like you'll get into some of the back and forth there and some of the fissures within the America First movement. But, I'm mainly tuned into Fox because I'm watching for the lawmaker interviews or the administration official interviews, because those tend to contain a little bit more news. Although you could argue these days that maybe a Bannon monologue might have more news because it does kind of reveal some of the fissures and present uh, a competing viewpoint to that of Trump's. But if you're watching Fox or Newsmax, even like CNN has gone kind of soft on some of this stuff. Like they had Mark Wayne Mullen on with Jake Tapper last night, and Mullen was suggesting that he was asked specifically about the IC assessment of Iran not pursuing nukes, and he basically said, we have information that contradicts that, but I can't talk about it in a public setting. And it's like, again, the flashback to the Iraq War buildup. That was what was going through my mind. But for those people who are just tuned in to kind of the mainstream programming on Fox, you wouldn't know that there's this fight even playing out because you're only hearing the MAGA version of it.
You got a whole bunch of Baghdad Bobs. That's an old
Yeah.
school reference for the old heads
Yeah.
On CNN and Fox. But I'm also watching the fissures happening online because we know now there's a bifurcation, and Steve Bannon and Tucker and Marjorie Taylor Greene, especially in the online spaces, are taking on the Fox narrative and actually mocking Ted Cruz. And you saw townhall.com speaking about the war on terror. I remember townhall.com was the online gathering place for basically the precursor to right-wing media, and they came out during the 9/11 that time on the internets, and they were the hub. Now Town Hall has taken the side of Ted Cruz against Tucker Carlson, and then Tucker Carlson went against Town Hall, which I think is really fascinating. And then Ted Cruz, is bothered by this because he spent all of last night trying to be the edgelord against Tucker, but he lost. I don't know if you saw Ted Cruz. Just these people can't even get their pop culture right, especially Star Wars, which really pisses me off. Did you see the image that he shared?
I did.
Can you tell
Yeah,
people,
of Luke
please?
Skywalker.
Because it is unforgivable
Okay.
for several reasons.
Let me just say, I've watched the Star Wars films, but I'm not like a Star Wars head. So I'm going to let you explain, because the plot of Star Wars is not something I could explain. So you go ahead and explain that.
All right. Okay. So as you can see, that's the Millennium Falcon. That's Boba Fett, Slave One. That's the Mandalorian Razor Crest. I kind of know. So he did this AI generated meme where it's Tucker Carlson interviewing Luke Skywalker, and Tucker Carlson is asking Luke Skywalker the population of the Death Star. For those who haven't seen this clip that's gone viral, Tucker Carlson asked Ted Cruz, well, what's the population of Iran? You want to bomb it? What's the population? What's the ethnic makeup? Ted Cruz knew nothing. So, pause. First and foremost, why it's so the mainstream of Islamophobia, folks, in the U.S. media, which has happened for decades. The Death Star, for those who haven't watched Star Wars, is literally a machine that kills planets, that is run by, the Empire, Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader, right? Like literally people who are a genocidal force willing to just eradicate their enemies. He's comparing Iran, a country of millions of people, to the Death Star. Number one. Number two, which perhaps is even more unforgivable than the first statement, is that Ted Cruz is comparing himself to Luke Skywalker. And I'm like, Ted Cruz, you are no Luke Skywalker, right? So they're exactly into Tasha. They're so stupid. And then you saw the internet just roast Ted Cruz. So talk to us about the right-wing reaction to Ted Cruz posting that, because Ted Cruz was really bothered by these clips that came out with Tucker Carlson.
Well, I think it was Ron Filipowski who posted that there's nothing more Ted Cruz than spending the whole night posting clips of a debate that you lost, which I thought was kind of a good way of putting it, because, Ted is so attention seeking that, I guess even though the debate didn't go well, he thought it was still kind of worth pushing the clips out and drawing all this attention to himself. But yeah, I mean, this is, it's interesting because I spend less time on X than I used to. I still post there a lot, but when I'm perusing a timeline, it's usually going to be on Blue Sky these days, just because so many people have packed up and left for over there. But, I really have been surprised with some of these Ted Tucker clips that, it really seems like X has sided with Tucker on this one. And I guess that's that,
really
maybe I shouldn't be, because again, like Ted Cruz in like the Fox News cinematic universe is kind of, like a, that's pretty much the only place where he has credibility at this point still. And so they still take him seriously, and like Hannity will take him seriously. But, if you pull up the mentions to any random post that he's putting on X, it's going to be people dunking on him, mocking him, criticizing him. But, again, like I was mainly seeing these on Asen's account because he was reposting the clips from Tucker. and the comments were all just roasting Ted. And so I can't speak specifically in terms of like what the right wing reaction was to that, but I think to the extent that Tucker's page is reflective of kind of the broader right wing sentiment on X. I mean, it certainly wasn't going well for Ted. But yeah, I mean, it was amusing to me as I saw Ted reposting all these clips and people just roasting him in the replies. It's like a normal person would probably be like, yeah, maybe I'll just lay low tonight and log off and take the L and just kind of quietly move on with my life. But not Ted. He's going to repost every clip that he sees, even when he's getting roasted.
I want you to ask about this because strategically, I think when your enemies are fighting, you can sit back and eat popcorn, or you can also egg them on. And I have tried to do my part in the past week, right? And like you, I think several others predicted that ultimately, when it comes to the MAGA movement, knowing these personalities that make them up, they're very petty, they're very self-centered, and like Donald Trump, they turn on each other. It happened in the first administration, and folks, it took about 5 months. It's happening right now. Some of the fights that are brewing, if you haven't paid attention: Tucker Carlson versus Ted Cruz. Before that, Tucker Carlson versus another influential kind of old guard head, Mark Levin, right? Who wants to go bomb Iran, right? You have now Marjorie Taylor Greene versus Laura Loomer. You have Tucker and Marjorie Taylor Greene versus Fox News. Then you have a part of the MAGA base that was radicalized by right-wing media and Fox around the Epstein files against Dan Bongino, Pam Bondi, and Kash Patel. And then you have Elon versus Donald Trump. And Elon really hit Donald Trump because because he spends all his time on Twitter, he knows all the memes, he knows all the shit talk. The Epstein thing, when Elon went with the Epstein thing, he knew what that would do with the base, right? Because the base is really pissed off that they have not received all the files, which is why I say, to paraphrase Topic Thunder, never go full conspiracy theorist. Go half conspiracy theorist. When it comes to the Epstein files and how this is a fissure that is kind of breaking apart MAGA, causing cracks in MAGA, can you tell people why they're so incensed about this and what right-wing media has been doing for the past 4 years when it comes to Epstein?
Yeah, I mean, very broadly, there's this idea on the right that that Epstein was part of a broader conspiracy, possibly involving Bill Clinton and other prominent, mostly Dems, because of course, like we've all seen the clips of Trump and Epstein partying, the photos, but there's kind of like I don't even really know how to explain that. I mean, like the cognitive dissonance is really odd to me, where like you go into the MAGA part of social media, and they're all on board with like Bill Clinton being a pedophile and all these Democrats are pedophiles, but yet like there's video of Trump and Epstein, and that somehow doesn't indict him at all, or isn't reflective of the fact that he was caught up in all this stuff.
Or
But there is
Epstein
an idea,
saying he was his closest friend?
right? Yeah. So it's very odd, but there's this notion now, and the version of this that I've seen the most of is kind of ire directed toward Pam Bondi. I was even watching this morning. Michael Flynn was on Benny Johnson's show, which I kind of dip into sometimes because Benny will get. He had Kelly Loeffler on there earlier this week, who's
Yeah.
a small business administrator, and so he'll get some people who have kind of like who have some power, and then that can be kind of interesting because Benny will kind of Kelly Loeffler on his show was endorsing basically the big lie in terms of even going to as far as to suggest that her election in 2020, I guess it was January 2021, when she lost her Senate seat, was rigged. So I thought that was interesting. But Michael Flynn was on with Benny today and was taking shots at Bondi, not over the Epstein stuff, but over the fact that she hasn't like frog marched James Comey, and like and prosecuted him at this point. But there's this idea with the Epstein stuff that Bondi is kind of in on the cover up. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what people believe the cover up is or like who she's protecting. I mean, the obvious person that she'd be protecting would be Trump, of course, and that is what Elon, was kind of alluding to in some of his posts, which I think he actually ended up taking down, right, and kind of apologizing for. And I was wondering with that, if that was because my take when that happened was bold move. I want to see if he has receipts for this because I thought just kind of putting that out there didn't really add anything to what we already knew. Now, of course, when you have someone like Elon saying that, it's going to be taken up a certain way by his followers who are mainly Trump people. And so I guess that can kind of, make it more explosive than like you or me saying that where, people kind of write us off as being libs anyways. Who cares what they think?
Yeah.
But I was wondering, with him going there, like, does he really are there receipts that he's aware of? Was that kind of like a threat where it's like, I know that you're involved in this, Trump, and like I'm going to put this out there, and now like if you continue to cross me, like then I can present the receipts and really get you. Or was he just kind of lashing out, in some sort of like ketamine fueled, crashing out 3 a.m. sort of situation? So I'm still not sure on that, but I had people in my life kind of come up and ask me about that particular post of Elon's, and my take was kind of like, I want to see the receipts, and I wonder if he has any.
And the receipts that I'm really interested in, and one of the posts that went under the radar is him openly saying that Republicans would not have won the House and Senate without Elon Musk. What does
Yeah.
that mean? I'm very curious. And remember, Donald Trump thanked Elon Musk when it came to the Pennsylvania voting machines. Something that, I don't know, Democrats should, if they weren't sleeping right now, they would probably get up on it. But I digress. Another fissure. I don't know if you've been following this because, folks, it's only been 5 months and they're already turning on each other, which is good. Any cracks in the fascist system, any cracks in the Death Star can be exploited by the Millennium Falcon, and I'm all here for it. Have you seen David Smith, the libertarian, turning publicly on Donald Trump and MAGA, saying that he betrayed the America First promise, that he's impotent? I can't believe he's going to war with Iran, and he went on Crystal Ball show and said, "I'm done with them." I'm curious if you caught that clip.
I had not seen that.
Yeah, so David Smith, this libertarian comic who actually still has a somewhat sizable audience, voted for Trump in 2024. Rallied all these bros to vote for Trump. One of these mediocre comedians who became part of the Joe Rogan brosphere. He came out this week publicly and said Donald Trump's flip flop on America First. He publicly renounced his support and said he regretted voting for Trump in 2024. Which, of course, a lot of these folks, I'm not God, I don't know what's in their hearts, but following these people, they went with the money, Aaron. They're like, oh, the brosphere. Okay, you can like make politically incorrect jokes, and I can lean in, and the MAGA bros like me, so they went in with MAGA. And now you're seeing a little bit of a retreat. You're seeing a little bit of a retreat that's happening. But also the numbers for the Quinnipiac poll last week that came out, Aaron. Trump's at 38%. He's underwater on everything, even on immigration and even on unleashing the National Guard and the military against innocent Los Angeles residents and citizens. When it comes to Fox and the right wing that you follow, trying to, if you will, sell the invasion angle, can you tell us how 25 to 30% of Americans are viewing what we see clearly as this unjustified crackdown on our fellow Americans? How are they being force-fed the lie that there is, quote, an invasion?
Yeah, just one side note. I mean, the clip kind of along the lines of what you were talking about with the libertarian that caught my eye this week was Rogan. I don't know if you saw this, where he, the clip was blowing up on X, where he was basically saying, if you are supportive of separating families, even if in the context of like, being a hard ass on immigration, like I'm not down with that, and you're an asshole, basically, is what he said. Where, I mean, it was hard not to kind of, there's barely any subtext that he was talking about Trump and kind of Trump's agenda. And so, for all the talk, can Democrats find a Joe Rogan? And, if Kamala just would have went on Joe Rogan's show, maybe she would have won. Like, the fact that there seems to be increasing daylight, and he's been very outspoken, that wasn't the first time, on immigration and kind of like how inhumane it is, which, I didn't realize that was kind of where he was coming from in that issue. It seems weird that he supported Trump in the first place, given that mass deportation was kind of the signature part of Trump's campaign.
Literally signed with the RNC. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. In any event, I think him kind of going there is significant, and shows how Trump's coalition is fragmenting. But with the LA protest specifically, again, like the Fox line on this is that, oh, it's a riot in LA, and look, these Dem cities are out of control, we need law and order, and so therefore Trump is justified in deploying the National Guard and possibly even Marines, because like look at how out of control it is. And of course, you can take little snippets of video from protests that were in downtown LA, and kind of, there's little clips of a store or two being looted, which was pretty isolated. But like, when you rip these things out of context, you can kind of push a narrative that really, it wasn't a protest, it was a riot, it wasn't peaceful. look at this, look at this altercation between a cop and a protester. Like, this isn't peaceful protest. This is rioting. So, I mean, it's really nothing that's like overly creative. It's just kind of, taking videos out of context. And of course, that stuff makes for really compelling television. So it was getting wall to wall coverage on Fox, when those protests were happening last week. But yeah, I mean, they're just kind of pushing the narrative, which is, very kind of tried and true Republican orthodoxy that blue cities, blue states are out of control, that there's a need for law and order, and that Trump is kind of the strong man who's going to impose it if Gavin Newsom and if Karen Bass can't. So, that was a line that I saw a lot of. And, but, you're right to kind of flag that Trump's numbers are pretty low. And even on immigration, which is his signature issue, he's underwater. So, and also like this, I don't think the kind of authoritarian takeover, the deploying of the Marines, National Guard, like none of that has been pulling well either. Now, I will say, kind of with all that being said, that, Fox had a new poll out today that Trump already melted down over on True Social, bashing their pollster and calling for Fox to fire them, even though the Fox pollster has been pretty legit over the years. But that poll, wasn't a good poll for Trump, but it showed, more of like a 45-55 disapproval to approval. So it didn't show kind of disastrous numbers for him. So my sense is that even with all of the chaos going on in the world, the world being on fire, unrest in the streets, the economic policies being, pretty shaky in terms of the impact on the macroeconomy, Trump still seems to me to be kind of in the band of normalcy of where his numbers were in the first term. So, I haven't gotten the sense that there's been kind of like, like the falling through the floor of his support or anything like that. Now, we'll see. I mean, I thought it was notable, Jerome Powell yesterday in his press conference after he decided not to lower interest rates, basically said that, there's an expectation that inflation is going to increase as the year goes along due to tariffs. It's kind of the old hot stove debate, right? Like, I think people are going to have to feel a little bit of pain before maybe they'll reassess their support for Trump, or, go from being kind of agnostic to being unsupportive, like strong disapproval. And I don't think we've quite gotten there yet. So, that's kind of, you want to contain the harms in the world. Like, certainly going to war in the Middle East would be an absolute disaster. Certainly, increasing tariffs over and over, as Trump has done in recent months, hurts Americans. And, I don't want people to feel to go hungry or things like that. But like, I think there is going to have to be some hot stove touching to get people to kind of reconsider their voting choices and hopefully make better choices in the future.
Yeah, and he's already underwater within 5 months. And folks, this is supposed to be the honeymoon period, and he's already dipped underwater on economy, underwater on inflation, underwater on tariffs, underwater now even on immigration. And even in some of those polls where he's about 52% on immigration, once his own base is asked, what happens if ICE goes after, grandmothers and legal immigrants? It plummets, folks. It plummets. And Abrego Kilmar Garcia, who was among the 238 people who were kidnapped without due process and sent to a foreign gulag to die, once there was pressure put on that story of Abrego Kilmar Garcia, he is negative 19 on that, which shows me, folks, that if Democrats come out and lead with values, right? For those who don't follow this, it was a senator here from Maryland, Van Hollen, went by himself to El Salvador. I think Democrats should have joined him. He went by himself to much risk to his life and said, I'm not going to leave until we get proof of life of Abrego Kilmar Garcia. By the second day, Abrego Kilmar Garcia, they got proof of life. That story was in the news for a week. As a result of the story being in the news for the week, because the media was forced to cover it, he goes double digits down on Abrego Kilmar Garcia. He's like negative 19 on that issue, right? So the more, in my opinion, if Democrats are watching, if anyone's watching who has the ear of Democrats, the establishment, by the way, this huge piece came out in the New York Times yesterday. They said the DNC is strapped for cash, right? Even though Donald Trump is underwater, folks, guess who's even more underwater than Donald Trump? The Democratic establishment. Fight. You need to fight. Put this in the news. Message. Lead with values. Lead with conviction. Fight, do not have Tucker Carlson being the loudest anti-war voice, for the love of God. Do not have Marjorie Taylor Greene being the loudest anti-war voice, Speak up on behalf of immigrants. And if you think you'd be safe, if you think you'll be okay, if you think your privilege will protect you, I give you Senator Padilla, who went there peacefully last week and said, hi, I'm Senator Padilla, and they jumped him. They saw a brown man and they went to work. And I give you over the weekend, New York City Comptroller Brad Lander. You saw the video and they went to work. And speaking about those two videos in particular, and why I think, Aaron, we've crossed the Rubicon and we're living in this type of reality where about 30% of our fellow Americans, I don't think they're not evil. They don't have horns in their head. But Aaron, we cannot crack this nut. And the reason why I say that is you and I saw the videos. And I'm going to quote 1984. The final, most essential command of the government was don't believe the evidence of your eyes and the evidence of your ears. We saw the video of Padilla, a city comptroller, Brad Lander. They were civil. They announced who they were. They did not lunge. They did not assault. If you see Fox News and right wing media, Aaron, tell them what they're telling the base.
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, and so the Padilla one is really interesting because I had actually taken that afternoon off, so I wasn't super logged on when that story was breaking. And I got a text from someone who works for a pretty high ranking comms director for a Democrat who basically he reached out and he said, "Do you think it's strange that Fox isn't covering the story yet?" And I said, "They're going to be covering it wall to wall soon. Like sometimes with something like that, if they don't have the video themselves that they can use, it takes them a little bit of time to track down a clip that they can put on the air." And then they did because and the reason that I said they're going to be covering a wall to wall is because the first clip where you could see Padilla, he was trying to ask her a question, and then he starts getting roughed up, but there was kind of a sense like you could watch it in a certain way and think that he was like trying to lunge at her, or try to approach the podium, which I don't think he was doing, but like and I knew right away that it was kind of catnip in that way because they could portray him as being unhinged, out of control. And of course, that's the storyline that they went with. The other thing that was really funny about that was within like an hour of that clip occurring and everybody starting to talk about it, Kristi Noem immediately rushed onto Fox to do damage control. They asked her softball questions, and the interviewer working hand in glove with her portrayed Padilla as being kind of unhinged and out of control. But yeah, I mean, you're right that the first clip that I saw was the one of him being like hauled down with his arm behind his back, and like thank God he's kind of like a healthy and hearty man because like that could have broken, if that had been like an older senator, like that could have broken their arm. You could have been seriously injured by that. But it was one of those kind of Rorschach tests where like I knew on Fox they were going to play it up as him being unhinged. Now the Landers one, because that like New York gets portrayed as kind of like a crime-ridden hellhole on Fox, even though most of their shows are based out of New York. But I haven't seen a ton of coverage of that, and so they don't dip that much into New York City politics other than having Eric Adams on Fox in front occasionally. But the Padilla one to me was kind of the ultimate example of how they live for stories like that, where you and I watch it and it's like, man, this is like they're roughing up the senator.
Aaron has some nutty internet connection right now, but even if you see him pixelated, hopefully you all can hear him. I've been able to hear him really well, so he's trying his best. But sorry, continue. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, you're kind of pixelated on my end too. I can hear you just fine, but I'm wondering if it's maybe a Substack thing today rather than an internet. I'm not.
Yeah, but
totally
I can
sure.
hear. Okay, as long as you all can hear. And thanks for the 1,300 folks who have joined us. Aaron's been dropping some truth bombs. For those who've joined us a bit late, I'm going to have this up in an hour so you can listen to the whole conversation with the transcript. But Aaron, I want to ask you two last quick questions.
Sure.
We saw this upside down with Senator Padilla, and I don't want people to forget that was only last Thursday. I don't want people to forget about Brad Lander. That was just a few days ago. And I also don't want people to forget that Vance Bolter, a radicalized, white, Trump-supporting, a registered Republican, Christian nationalist, had a hit list with 70 targets that included Democratic elected officials, lawmakers, abortion providers, and then he also wanted to strike at the No Kings rally. He visited 4 homes, folks. Thank God 2 of the homes were empty, but sadly 2 of the homes, there were occupants. This included Representative Melissa Hortman, who was shot and killed by Vance Bolter and her husband, and also included another state representative and his wife, Yvette, who are recovering. They were shot, but thankfully they are recovering in the hospital. We saw, and we've mentioned this for the people who join us, bring things back full circle. We're old enough, Aaron, that if God forbid this has happened, Steve Scalise, Republican, when a dude who shot him and seemed to be radicalized, you saw Democrats across the board say this is wrong. They oppose violent extremism, regardless if it was a Democrat, a Republican, a liberal, or conservative. They said there's no place for mass shooting and vigilante violence. We saw Vance Bolter. And tell us how the right wing is not covering it and or covering it.
Yeah, so I mean, people have probably seen the conspiracy theories about this, where Tim Walz had put Bolter on a kind of nothing burger commission, some sort of business commission, and so the spin right away. Yes, and so the spin right away became, oh, Tim Walz couldn't possibly put a right winger on a commission, so this guy must be a leftist, and that's literally the only evidence, or even like hint that this guy wasn't a right winger, because of course, like his signature issue that, he was evangelizing about in Africa was anti-abortion. His roommate said that he was a strong Trump supporter and voted for him. But, it just became a way where the right wing could kind of not really engage with the truth of the matter, which is that, right wing violence is a huge problem in this country. We've seen it over and over, going back to Paul Pelosi, January 6th, these assassinations in Minnesota. And not only that, but it's violence that Trump has actively encouraged by joking about the Paul Pelosi attack, by pardoning the January 6th insurrectionists. Even when he's been asked about Bolter, he's immediately changed the topic to Tim Walz and attacking him. And so, the Trump is all about terrorizing his opponents. It's a core part of his movement. But, his supporters will grasp a hold of these slender reeds to kind of ignore that or to change the topic, which in this case was that Tim Walz had put this guy on this committee. And, of course, I thought the most reprehensible example of this was Mike Lee, who posted a bunch of just horrible stuff, about Nightmare on Wall Street, again, suggesting that this guy was somehow a product of Tim Walz, or Tim Walz supported him in some way. I love the fact that Tina Smith confronted him, and I love that she went on TV and said, this is not a man who's used to being confronted. He seemed kind of uncomfortable. He ended up kind of offering some apology that was like, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings kind of thing. But then he did end up deleting his posts. So at least, there's kind of a consciousness of guilt there. But yeah, I mean, I think that this is kind of what the Trump movement never wants to engage on the merits when something like this happens and kind of do self-reflection and hold people accountable. They want to use it to score political points, even in a case like this, where if you did 5 minutes of research on this, there was nothing to it. And these talking points from the right are persuasive enough or prominent enough where even the local publication here in Minnesota, the Star Tribune, had to do a big fact check and kind of explainer on the fact that this Beutler guy was not, in fact, a left-winger. And so, it gets oxygen even in that way, where even where it's being debunked, it's being talked about. And I think that's part of the playbook here, too.
And you saw this happening, folks, with Trump's assassination, where the shooter is a white male, registered Republican Trump voter. And like a couple of years ago, he did a $12 donation to Act Blue. And then they did the spin that, oh, see, he did a $12 donation to Act Blue. And then that was in the news. And people tried to both sides it. And specifically right now, when it comes to Vance Bolter, Don Jr., I think Fredo, said that the number one terror threat is transgender activists. He said that. I think when he was talking to Bannon, excuse me, when he was talking to one of these individuals, right? So this is
Yeah.
how shameless they've become. The number one domestic terror threat, folks, in America for several years running has been right-wing terrorism and white supremacy. It is the number one domestic terror threat in terms of the people they've killed, in terms of plots that the FBI have located, and thank God, if you will, derailed, and the number one threat to law enforcement. But the right wing never talks about it. And as Vance Bolter literally had a list of 70 people had committed an act of political assassination, Donald Trump, instead of calling Tim Walz, he still hasn't called Tim Walz, he posted, I'm going to expand the war against the illegal aliens from LA to other blue cities, right? So what they're telling you is, don't worry about the number one domestic terror threat in America, right-wing terrorism, for several years running now. Worry about this manufactured threat of invasion, which is not real, which is why I believe, Aaron, and the final question I want to ask you is, there's no both sides to this, right? I critique the Democratic Party. For those who've joined us late, I critique them, especially that failed leadership, especially when it comes to now, because I'm not saying Washington Tucker Carlson. We call him a piece of shit. But what we're saying is, why is Tucker Carlson asking questions of Ted Cruz and asking the right questions that would keep us from going to war with Iran? How come those questions aren't being asked by the Democratic establishment? Why is Massie, Representative Massie, being more vocal than Senator Schumer, right? Those are legitimate questions. We're not whitewashing Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens or Nick Fuentes or any of these individuals, but I still say there's no both sides between MAGA and the Democratic Party, between Donald Trump and, Kamala Harris. It's not even close. What we're dealing with is a right-wing authoritarian force that is perfectly fine destroying the Constitution and unleashing chaos and violence against any and all of their critics. And if you think I'm being hyperbolic, I give you the National Guard busting heads in LA. I give you Senator Padilla, who's him being a senator didn't protect him because his brown skin. They saw that brown skin. They jumped on him. Brad Lander, white Jewish man from New York, didn't protect him, right? They're going after anyone and everyone. And if you think you're a white conservative and you'll be safe from fascists, I give you Ted Cruz running for his life on January 6th, the whitest, most Christian, most conservative man on earth. And even he wasn't safe. And so, Aaron, I say all this because it comes to both sides, corporate media and Jake Tapper. And I haven't talked to you since the Jake Tapper of it all. Your take.
Yeah. So where to begin on that? Boy, I think the thing that rankles people about Tapper and myself included in this is that um, it's the focus on Biden's age at this point seems so out of step with the challenges we're facing as a nation and the authoritarian threat. And I know people saw this. That you got a lot of pickup. I posted a clip. Tapper was on C-SPAN a couple days ago, and this caller called in like a very grandmotherly old woman, and basically, vented a lot of the frustrations that people have. And you could see he was kind of visibly uncomfortable. But then in his answer to her, he basically said that he doesn't view Trump's mental state as being as big of a story as Biden's because this is always how Trump has been. And so the fact that he's always been nuts or always been unhinged somehow makes
Oh
it less of a
God.
story. And to me, I think that's where it's like, they're kind of making excuses for this guy. But yeah, the other thing that I thought was notable, Tapper, is that, it seemed like they kind of worked backwards in terms of how they did their book, where he's talked about this in interviews, where they started the day after the election. He said, Biden's decision to run again is why Trump won. And then it seemed like they tried to backfill the whole story of the original sin, kind of ignoring the fact that Biden was, in fact, pushed off the ticket for Kamala Harris. The role that racism and misogyny may have played in Kamala losing, and how their own coverage. I mean, think back to the debate with Biden and Trump, which obviously Biden was a complete disaster during that debate. But one of the things that people have forgotten is, remember, Jake Tapper and Dana Bash refused to fact check anything. That was part of the
Yep.
agreement, apparently, with Trump. And so kind of ignoring their own culpability in the fact that Trump was sane washed and was able to be presented as basically Pepsi to Kamala's Coke sort of thing. And yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I could talk about Jake Tapper all day. I don't have any personal animus toward him, but um, it's not just writing the book, but kind of turning CNN into an infomercial for the book, just the shamelessness of that. And so if people haven't seen it, look back a couple days on my timeline, this clip of this grandmother basically carrying him a new one on C-SPAN while the camera is on Jake
It's
Tapper and
awesome.
he's kind of uncomfortably licking his lips. And, and then he comes back with a retort to her that, again, I think kind of exposed the fundamental flaws in the way that he thinks about Trump and Biden, where, Biden having age-related decline was bigger than Watergate, as he put in one of the interviews. But with
Jesus.
Trump, it's not. It's just another day because this is how he's always been.
Yeah, to normalize fascism, to normalize an authoritarian, to normalize a man who quotes Hitler, to normalize a man who's unleashed the National Guard and the military against his own people, to normalize a man who just turned 79 years old, is the oldest man to ever be elected, just stumbled. If you saw that, he stumbled going up the stairs of Air Force One. What would have happened if it was Biden? Which is always a good question to ask to show you the asymmetry when it comes to coverage and how the Overton window shifts to the right more and more when you do a both sides framing on something which is not both sides, because there's no equivalence whatsoever.
Yep.
Donald Trump, this is top of my head, Donald Trump, who literally just says has attended only 14 security briefings, where Tulsi Gabbard leaked that she has to now essentially think about making Fox News briefs just to have Donald Trump pay attention. That's the commander in chief, folks. She literally is thinking about, he doesn't read. He's only attended about 14. Maybe I'll do in Fox News hits and we'll do like video for him. This is a man who openly said on camera, what's the Congo? I don't know what it is. And who's literally on camera has said, what am I signing? When he signs executive orders. Clearly,
Oh
this
yeah.
man has had decline, and we're still doing this both side shit. And the reason why I bring it up is the dereliction of duty, Aaron. The dereliction of duty, where the media is supposed to be the fourth estate. You're supposed to ask follow-up questions. You're supposed to not do it both sides. The people who say there's a view from nowhere, that's bullshit. You and I know it's all subjective. What's the headline? What's on the top fold? What do you cover? Who's the expert who's brought on, right? So the fact that they're doing this, I criticize them, because not like Aaron, I don't have any personal animosity. I used to work for CNN as a commentator for a year. They treated me well. I don't have any animosity. I want to shame them into doing better, Aaron. And we've seen that shaming works, right? In the sense that corporations are now moving away from those law firms that bent the knee and offered Donald Trump $1 billion, $1 billion of pro bono work. You saw
Yep.
Terry Moran. He was completely right in his post about Stephen Miller. ABC bent the knee, fired him. Now Terry's crushing it on Substack. Welcome, Terry. And you're seeing, CBS trying to bend the knee to fuel this Paramount merger, and even Jake Tapper and CNN. Folks, they thought they'd win over MAGA. MAGA hates them even more. They're mocking them and ridiculing them. So to quote Born Identity, look at what they make you give. Aaron, I kept you longer than I thought I would.
No,
Uh,
thanks for having
1,500
me.
a
Yeah,
thousand five hundred people are watching. people who are tuning in late, we're going to have this up later. It's going to be on Aaron's public notes. It'll be up on the left hook. Aaron, before I let you go, shamelessly promote yourself. How can people find you, support you, listen to you?
Sure. No, and I was just going to say I'm grateful for Substack, even though I am going to email them over the video quality here today, because I do these we do a Friday show, myself and David Neer from the Down Ballot. We never really have video issues like this, so I'm guessing it might be something on their end, but maybe we'll figure that out. But anyway, if you like the commentary that you've heard here today, check out publicnotice.co. You can find me on Blue Sky. I'm at atrupar.com on Blue Sky, atrupar on Twitter. I've got a great team of contributors. So we're doing kind of explanatory coverage of U.S. politics and media. I think you'll like it if you like this conversation today. So check it out. And like I said, I do a Friday, every Friday afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern, I do a live with David Neer of the Down Ballot. His expertise is down ballot races, but we talk kind of national stories as well.
Thank you all for joining. This is the Left Hook. I had started this a year ago. My mom reminded me. I thought if I'd be lucky, I'd get 5,000 subscribers. We're up to 72,000. It's independent.
Wow.
I'm a simple man, but it's gone a long way. I'm a fool, but I'm not an idiot. I have no paywalls. I've kept everything for free. If you have money, give a couple of bucks. If you don't, I believe citizens should be informed during the rise of fascism. I heard someone said democracy dies in darkness. Who said that, Aaron? I wonder who said that.
I think that was
If you can,
Jeff
be a
Bezos in
subscriber.
a previous life.
Yeah, I wonder who said that. So, folks, if you can, subscribe to the Left Hook. We have fantastic conversations with people like Aaron and others. I try to make the content relevant. We try to break down big issues for folks because what's common to me and Aaron might not be common to everyone. And we're trying to build out a community and support other folks who are fighting the good fight. I also co-host Democracy-ish with the fantastic Danielle Moody. Tomorrow, we're live, 12 p.m. Eastern Time on Danielle Moody's YouTube channel. Check it out. That community is growing. Folks, be kind, take care of yourselves, be empathetic, and please, oh, please, don't be a fascist. Aaron, have a good weekend, buddy, and happy Juneteenth, everyone. Happy Juneteenth. They can't take that away from us. Later.
Thanks for having me on. Talk to you later.